The Courier is very much a Sunday afternoon Cold War thriller if ever there was one. It's a true story of one man learning the power of friendship while overcoming the adversities of a brutal communist regime in an era when political tensions between East and West were at their hottest. It has its dark moments, but ultimately it still has the tone of something like Downton Abbey. Its plot also is eerily similar to the far superior Bridge of Spies. Benedict Cumberbatch was once one of my very favourite actors, but like a lot of British stars that became big in the States, I started to lose interest in him as I thought he'd started to flanderise himself with the roles he'd picked. I suppose I also fell out of love a bit with his star-making show Sherlock, which I began to realise wasn't as good as I first remembered it. I do still love Cumberbatch's Doctor Strange, but it's good to see him doing quote-unquote real acting every now and again. His performance as Greville Wynn starts off as quite caricaturish, but then by the third act, when things start to get more serious, he really starts to show off his chops. Jessie Buckley is an actress with a pretty great career in a pretty short amount of time. She has a phenomenal performance in the fantastic miniseries Chernobyl, and she's been a standout lead in some good and some not-so-good films, including one directed by Charlie Kaufman. With that in mind, it seems like a bit of a step down for her to play what is essentially a moaning wife character. Mrs. Wynn is a pretty poorly written and boring character who doesn't have much purpose other than to be Benedict Cumberbatch's wife. Jessie Buckley manages to still do a lot with the pretty minimal material she's given, but I still can't help thinking that this role could have been easily fulfilled by a much cheaper actress to much the same effect. The standout performance for me, however, was Merab Nenidze as the story's true hero, Oleg Penkovsky. He's the best character in the film and he has all the best scenes. It's quite an understated performance, but I think there's a good combination of a talented actor mixed with a very well-written character. Nenidze also just has a very good voice, and I hope I can hear it in more things soon. Admittedly, his character is very similar to Mark Rylance's in Bridge of Spies, so maybe Nenidze will have a similar short-lived spout of roles in big films to Rylance. The Courier is very well directed for the most part. For something that's clearly aiming for more of an older demographic, it's got some really great shots and some very creative framing in certain scenes. Granted, it's no grand example of an auteur at work, but it's certainly more expressive than your average Agatha Christie episode. The cinematography too is also pretty outstanding throughout. The colouring of a lot of the shots is often superb, though the soundtrack isn't particularly memorable and could well have been just stock music. The majority of the Courier's story covers the events leading up to and after the Cuban Missile Crisis. This is an event during the Cold War that I feel has been a bit overcovered in media. The Courier, however, does add a new layer to an already very interesting part of history that I didn't know about, as the majority of the coverage of those events are done from an American perspective. It's always interesting to see the British point of view of any points in what is essentially American history. All that being said, this film is nowhere near as entertaining and brilliant as the best film about the Cuban Missile Crisis, X-Men First Class. The Courier is a well-acted, well-directed and reasonably well-written thriller that will not leave you disappointed. If you like historical thrillers, then this will be worth your time, but it's nowhere near the best example of a film like this, and it's not the kind of film you'll really remember after a year or two. The Courier gets a Deight score of 6. Happy dating, you loners.